I didn't know my wife had a kid until he called me dad at our wedding. I was standing at the altar with my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. My best friend Mark was a few steps away. The officiant was patiently waiting with a practiced smile. And in front of me stood Jessica, the woman who had turned my entire life around from the very first moment I laid eyes on her. The midday sun streamed through the tall windows, and clusters of white roses lined the aisle. On either side, friends and family watched us with that soft, hopeful expression you only see at weddings, and I was thinking that every step we'd taken together, every little challenge and misunderstanding, had led us to this perfect day. I told myself I was the luckiest guy alive, that I was finally going to start the life I always claimed I wasn't even sure I deserved. My mother was dabbing the corner of her eyes with a tissue. Jessica's parents stood right behind her, and from the glimmer in her father's gaze, I could tell he was proud to see his daughter so happy. Jessica looked stunning in her ivory gown, a gentle bouquet of pastel flowers in her hands, her long, dark hair trailing down her shoulders. Our eyes locked, and even though I'd seen her in that dress before, during a quick last-minute fitting, I still couldn't catch my breath. The officiant began to speak, quietly instructing us to join hands, and my fingers tightened around Jessica's. We were on the verge of making our vows, but just as I opened my mouth to speak, I heard it, a small but piercing voice that sliced through the hush of the crowd. "Daddy!" A child's voice cried out from somewhere behind the neat rows of chairs. My body tensed. I glanced reflexively over my shoulder, looking for the kid's actual father. Then a blur of a boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old, zipped past the startled guests, dashing straight toward Jessica and me. I blinked, overwhelmed with confusion. The hush gave way to a ripple of gasps and murmurs. Without hesitation, the boy stopped right at my feet, grinning so widely I could see a tiny gap where he must have lost a baby tooth. "Daddy!" he repeated, arms outstretched, as though we were in the middle of a playground, not my wedding ceremony. The officiant fell silent. Someone at the back let out a low whistle, and I felt Jessica's hand quake in mine. Everything around me froze except for this beaming little boy gazing up like I was his personal superhero. My mom's eyebrows shot up in confusion. Mark was staring too, and Jessica looked as though the ground might split beneath her. I swore I heard her whisper my name under her breath. Andrew, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from the child. In the pit of my stomach, I felt a cold knot of dread forming. Kids don't just randomly call a stranger Daddy, do they? For a second, that felt like a lifetime. I wondered if this was some bizarre prank set up by one of my college buddies. Then the boy tugged the hem of my suit jacket. His eyes were bright with happiness. I actually crouched down a little, bewildered, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. And that's when I caught sight of something in his expression, something oddly familiar in the shape of his cheeks, the arch of his eyebrows. My mouth went painfully dry. I managed to stammer, "Hey there, buddy. Are you lost?" He shook his head vigorously, as if the notion was ridiculous. "No, I'm not lost," he said, his small voice calm yet insistent. "I'm here with Mommy." And that's when his gaze shifted to Jessica. He darted a look at her, almost as if seeking her approval. A silent wave of tension pulsed through the wedding guests. They all turned to Jessica, and she just froze, her lips parted, tears welling in her eyes. I stared at her in sheer disbelief, not sure if I should speak, ask a question, or get the officiant to usher him out. I felt unsteady, like the floor might give way beneath me. The child turned back to me, face glowing with such innocent joy. "I waited so long to meet you," he added quietly, voice carrying in the hush. At that point, I slowly rose, holding my breath. Jessica took a faltering step forward, whispering his name, Noah, and placing a hand on his shoulder. I felt an electric jolt of understanding pass through my veins. This was her son. There was no doubt in my mind now. She looked so guilty, so devastated. She mouthed, "I'm sorry," and gently tried to guide Noah away from me. But the little boy resisted, clinging to my jacket. Nobody knew what to do. My mother half stood from her seat, uncertain whether to rush over or remain frozen in shock. Jessica's mom was covering her mouth. Her father looked like someone had just told him his entire life was a lie. The officiant lowered the microphone, apparently deciding that no scripted speech could salvage this moment. And me? My mind churned, every neuron on overdrive. I felt betrayed, stunned, furious, and weirdly protective all at once. This tiny human was looking at me as if I were the main event of his day, a day I had no clue he was even part of. Finally, Jessica broke the silence. Her voice was trembling as she said, "Noah, sweetheart, come here. Let's let Andrew and everyone finish the ceremony." But she wasn't fooling anyone. Her cheeks were flushed, and the tears began to slip down, one after another. My heart twisted painfully. She sounded so desperate, so terrified. The officiant cleared his throat, started to say, "Perhaps we should have a brief pause," but Mark, my friend, stepped in and urged him to stop talking. Some of the guests were already whispering in confusion. some leaning to one another with wide eyes. I heard 1,000 half-sentences swirling around. Her kid? He called him dad? Did Andrew know? What in the world is happening? I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to get out of the spotlight, at least for a minute. I gently extricated myself from Noah's grip and motioned for Mark to help direct the boy back to Jessica's mother. Then, catching Jessica's panicked gaze, I jerked my head in a silent request for her to follow me. She hesitated, placed a hand on Noah's hair as if to assure him everything was fine, and then hurried behind me through a small side door leading into a quiet hallway of the venue. The hush of the garden gave way to the hushed echo of our footsteps on tiled floors. The moment we were alone, I spun around to face her. My stomach churned, and for a second I couldn't even form a sentence. Finally, I managed a broken whisper. "You have a son? And you never told me?" My voice rose on the last few words, sharper than I intended. Jessica's eyes brimmed with fresh tears. Her usually calm expression was shattered, like she was seconds away from falling apart. "Andrew," she began, "please, I can explain." "Explain?" I echoed in disbelief, raking a hand through my hair. "You think there's some magic explanation that makes this okay? You've been keeping a child, a whole human being, secret from me. We were about to say our vows." My mind flashed back over every late-night conversation, every moment of closeness when I thought I knew everything that mattered about her. How had I been so oblivious? Her voice wobbled as she spoke. "I was scared. I was terrified you'd run. Every other man I dated before couldn't handle it. I wanted to tell you 1,000 times, but every time I tried, I saw this look in your eyes, like you were finally happy with how things were, and I just couldn't bear the thought of losing you." My stomach twisted tighter. "So you decided to roll the dice and let me find out on our wedding day? And from your son, no less?" My frustration built. "Did you plan for him to be here all along?" "No," she sobbed. "I told my mom not to bring him, but he insisted on coming. He was so excited to see the man I was marrying. He's been asking about you for weeks, saying he wants to meet his new dad. I thought if I tried just a bit longer to keep it quiet, maybe after the wedding, I could find the perfect time to tell you everything. I know it sounds insane, but I was stuck, Andrew. I love you so much, and I was so afraid of losing you, I kept telling myself I'd do it next week, next month, until suddenly here we are. I couldn't process how a woman who had shown me so much kindness and warmth could keep such a life-altering secret. My shoulders slumped as I recalled the countless nights we spent together, sharing dreams and fears that apparently didn't include revealing a child. Fury clouded my judgment. But deep down, I also felt the sting of heartbreak. She'd never trusted me to accept Noah. She had assumed I'd bolt, just like all the others. I found my voice again, quieter now. "But we talked about kids, Jess. You always said someday, like you didn't have any yet." She pressed her hands to her face, trembling. "I know. I lied. I'm so sorry." A part of me wanted to walk away right then, furious that I'd been blindsided in front of everyone I knew and loved. Another part couldn't ignore the agony in her voice, the raw desperation in her eyes. I couldn't ignore the memory of how many times she'd rescued me from my own nightmares, how she had been the first person to make me believe I could truly have a home that didn't crumble around me. In a trembling voice, I asked, He's 4, right? Where's his father?" She nodded, swallowing hard. "He left as soon as I told him I was pregnant. I was barely out of college. My parents helped, but it was a dark time. I tried to date again eventually, but most men would walk away once they realized a child was in the picture. By the time I met you, I had lost all faith. I was sure you'd do the same if you found out, so I just pretended." I closed my eyes, exhausted by the barrage of emotions swirling inside me. "I wish you had trusted me," I whispered. "I might have handled it differently, but Jess, how can you expect me to move past this now?" She shook her head, tears spilling over. "I don't expect anything. If you want to call off the wedding, I won't blame you. My only regret is hurting you, because you are the best man I've ever known." At that, I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to lash out, but the image of Noah's hopeful face kept surfacing. His big brown eyes shone with a joy that shouldn't be tainted by my anger. In that instant, I knew if I ran from this, I'd run from him too. And that thought tore me apart. I exhaled shakily. "We can't go back out there and pretend nothing happened. I need time to think. This is too big, Jess." She nodded, dropping her gaze. "I'll let everyone know the wedding is postponed. Or canceled. Whatever you decide. I'm so sorry." We left the hallway separately, returning to the garden in uneasy silence. People stood in clusters, looking as though they'd witnessed a calamity, not a wedding. Mark approached me, brows knit with concern, and asked if I wanted him to announce that the ceremony wouldn't be happening today. I just nodded. I couldn't even speak. I watched as my guests, confused and sympathetic, began filtering out. My mother stopped by to give me a tight hug, tears brimming in her own eyes, but I was beyond comfort. Jessica had disappeared into the crowd with Noah, and a part of me felt relieved I didn't have to see them. Yet, in the days that followed, I was a mess of conflicting emotions. The phone didn't stop buzzing with messages from relatives, half of them angry on my behalf, the other half concerned. Mark tried to get me out of the house, but I refused. At one point, Jessica called. My phone showed her name, and I just stared at it, not ready to speak. A couple of times I typed out a text to her, only to delete it. I couldn't figure out if I wanted to cut ties or fight for an explanation that might mend my shattered trust. My thoughts spiraled back to my earliest memories of Jessica, how she'd saved me from my own cynicism after my ex cheated on me, how she'd introduced me to her circle of friends with that glowing pride in her voice, how she made me believe in love again. Yet now, I understood that behind her smiles and warmth, she'd concealed an entire side of her life. The ramifications of that were enormous. I'd planned to build a life with her, maybe eventually have children, except apparently she already had one. The revelation stung not only because she lied, but because it cast doubt on whether I knew her at all. A week passed before I had the courage to see her again. She asked if we could meet at a small cafe near her apartment. My heart thudded as I sat down at a booth by the window, noticing the swirl of cappuccino foam in my mug. She arrived about 10 minutes later, wearing a plain sweater and jeans, looking subdued. Her eyes were puffy, like she'd cried all night. She slid into the seat across from me, barely making eye contact. A heavy silence fell. Finally, she broke it. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I don't know what else to say. I know I messed up everything." I stared at my mug, tracing the rim with my thumb. "You hid your own son from me, Jess. I keep asking myself if there were clues I missed." She looked genuinely anguished. "I tried so hard to hide it all. Whenever you were around, I'd make sure Noah stayed with my mom. If there were toys lying around, I shoved them out of sight. That time, you stopped by with pastries. That morning, he was in the living room and I freaked out. So I practically chased you out the door. I was so scared you'd see him and leave me." Hearing how far she went to keep the secret hurt in ways I couldn't articulate. "I just don't know how to feel about this," I admitted. "On one hand, I love you. I wanted to marry you. On the other hand, you acted like you never trusted me at all." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "That's exactly it, Andrew. I was too afraid to trust. That has nothing to do with you and everything to do with my past. The father of my child ghosted me the moment I said I was pregnant. The men who came after that dropped out of my life as soon as they realized I had a baby. I was drowning in a pattern, and then I met you, this amazing man who listened to me, cared about me. I felt safe, but not safe enough to be honest, and I hate myself for that." My chest ached at the sight of her pain, but I also remembered how Noah had looked at me during the ceremony, like seeing me was the best gift he could ask for. "What about him?" I asked softly. "Has he always known about me?" She sniffed, nodding. "He's seen pictures of us together on my phone. He'd ask who you were, and I'd say, Mommy's friend." He was curious but respectful. Then when I told him we were getting married, he started calling you Daddy in private. I asked him not to. I said I didn't know if that was okay yet, but he was so excited. She sighed, wringing her hands. When my mom brought him to the venue, he just couldn't hold back. A long silence followed. I fought the urge to bury my face in my hands. "Look," I finally said. "I'm not here to punish you, but this changes everything. I can't just pretend it's fine. You betrayed my trust, and now there's a kid involved. I need to figure out if we can start over somehow. Do you even want that? Because if you just want me to vanish..." She shook her head wildly. "No, I love you. If you're willing to talk, to try, I want that more than anything. If you're willing to meet Noah properly, I want that too. But I understand if you can't." I stared out the cafe window, watching people pass by on the sidewalk. Mothers holding toddlers' hands, friends chatting and laughing. "I do want to meet him," I admitted, "but I'm not ready to jump into fatherhood overnight. This is going to take time." She let out a heavy breath, relief flickering in her eyes. "I'll wait as long as it takes." It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a beginning. Over the next few weeks, we took small steps. Jessica and I met in public places, strictly to talk. No illusions of romance. Then she suggested introducing me to Noah one afternoon at a local park. I was nervous, to say the least. Part of me feared that seeing him would make the betrayal more real, opening wounds that hadn't even scabbed over. But as soon as I caught sight of him in his bright red jacket, running around the playground, I felt something deeper than anger or hurt. He was just a little boy, full of energy and wonder, who'd gotten lost in the adult drama swirling around him. He spotted me and shyly shuffled over, hugging Jessica's leg. I managed to smile, kneeling down to his level. "Hey, Noah," I said gently, trying to sound relaxed. "I'm Andrew." Noah peered up at Jessica, then at me. "Hi," he said quietly. "Mommy said you might want to be my friend." That sentence nearly broke me. I forced a steady breath, nodding. "Yeah, I do want to be your friend." A small grin appeared on his face, and he reached out to take my hand, pulling me toward the monkey bars. It was the smallest gesture, but it melted away a layer of my apprehension. I realized that day that no matter how betrayed I felt, this kid was innocent. He shouldn't have to pay for his mother's mistake. If anything, he deserved to see that not every man would run away. In the weeks that followed, Jessica and I navigated the rocky terrain of our relationship. She gave me space when I needed it, but also tried to show me that she was ready to be open and transparent. She shared stories of Noah's life, his favorite foods, his bedtime routines, the silly words he mispronounced. At times, hearing these details fueled my sense of betrayal. How could she lock away this entire world? But other times, it made me smile, realizing what a sweet kid he was. We went to therapy too, something I never thought I'd do. A local counselor named Dr. Bailey helped us talk through the betrayal. Jessica spoke more candidly about her past relationships and her abandonment fears than she ever had with me alone. I opened up about my own trust issues, about how my father had left when I was 10. My mother tried to fill both roles, but there was always a wound there. And ironically, Jessica's actions had ripped it open wider than ever. The sessions were painful, but also enlightening. We learned about each other's insecurities and realized we both carried deep scars. As for Noah, each time I saw him, I grew more attached. One day, we were at Jessica's apartment, and he brought me a pile of crayons and asked me to color with him. I ended up spending a solid hour with him, scribbling giant dinosaurs and pirates across sheets of paper. He told me his favorite color was green, that he liked mac and cheese but hated broccoli, and that he wanted a puppy someday. His chatty innocence hit me in the gut. If things continued to go well, I might one day be a real father figure to him. That realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. About 3 months after the wedding disaster, Jessica and I were in a much better place. I still lived in my own apartment, needing my independence until I was certain we could rebuild. But I started visiting them more often, occasionally staying for dinner or reading Noah a bedtime story. Every now and then, I'd catch Jessica staring at me with gratitude and something else. Maybe hope. She never once pressured me to propose again, and I appreciated that. She knew any talk of marriage would make me anxious after what had happened. One night, after Noah had gone to bed, Jessica and I were sitting on the couch together. A movie paused on the screen. She looked at me, tears collecting at the corners of her eyes. "You know," she said softly, "I understand if you never want to marry me. I betrayed your trust in the worst way possible. But for whatever it's worth, you've shown me more compassion than I ever expected to deserve." I took her hand, lacing my fingers with hers. "I don't know what the future holds," I admitted. "I'm still scared, but I do know I love you, and I care about Noah." She rested her head on my shoulder, exhaling a shaky breath, and that small moment felt like a promise. Maybe not a promise of marriage yet, but a promise that we were in this together for as long as it took. Over the following year, we slowly patched our lives back into something that resembled a family. I moved into a nearby townhouse so I could be closer, and it wasn't unusual for Jessica and Noah to come over with groceries, cooking dinner at my place. Sometimes we'd go out on simple adventures, a baseball game, a kid-friendly concert in the park, or just a lazy weekend at home. Noah began calling me Andrew consistently, but every once in a while he'd slip and call me Daddy. Each time he did, Jessica would give me a searching look, and I'd nod that it was okay. The truth was, it stopped triggering panic in me. Instead, I felt an odd warmth, even if I wasn't entirely sure how to respond. We also had more therapy sessions because trust isn't rebuilt overnight. Jessica, to her credit, never withheld anything from me again. She included me in all decisions about Noah, his schooling, his pediatrician appointments, his play dates. She let me see every corner of her life, no more secrets stashed in closets. As the months wore on, the nightmares of that day at the altar receded, replaced by new, better memories. Then, one evening in late spring, we found ourselves talking about the future. Noah was asleep in his room, and Jessica and I were sitting on her porch, sipping iced tea. Fireflies blinked in the backyard. She asked me what I envisioned for the next few years, gently testing the waters. I hesitated, not wanting to jump too fast. But the truth was, I could picture everything. The three of us together, maybe adopting a dog, maybe traveling out west to show Noah the Grand Canyon. I told her as much, and she smiled, tears sliding down her cheeks. A few days later, I asked her if we could consider redoing the wedding, on a much smaller scale, minus the surprises. She stared at me, her eyes widening with disbelief, then flung her arms around me in a hug so tight I could barely breathe. We didn't rush the details. This time, we wanted to be absolutely sure we were doing it for the right reasons, with no secrets looming. It took another 6 months of careful planning, ongoing therapy, and slow steps toward forging an honest family bond. Finally, we set a date, a simple ceremony in the backyard of her parents' home. We invited only our closest friends and relatives, and of course, Noah was there. When I first saw Jessica in her dress that day, my chest constricted with emotion. She was radiant, not just beautiful, but at peace, her face free of the guilt and fear that once haunted her. Noah stood between us in a little suit, grinning ear to ear. Before we exchanged vows, He handed me the ring with all the seriousness of a ring bearer who knows exactly how important his job is. As I slipped it onto Jessica's finger, I felt tears sting at my eyes. Because this time, there would be no dreadful shock, no illusions. We were entering marriage with our eyes open, hearts open, and the determination to face everything together. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Noah yelled, "Yay!" and practically tackled us in a hug. We both laughed through our tears. Glancing around at the guests, I saw Mark wiping his eyes, my mother smiling proudly, Jessica's dad giving me a nod of approval. I knew they all remembered the chaos of the first wedding attempt, and this was a kind of healing, a second chance that not everyone gets. Later that evening, while Noah chased the neighbor's dog around the yard, Jessica and I stood by the fence, watching him. She turned to me and said quietly, "I never dreamed life could be this good." I slipped an arm around her, breathing in the sweet smell of freshly cut grass. "You had me fooled pretty good at first," I teased, giving her a wry smile. She looked down, a hint of regret surfacing in her expression. I quickly added, "But I'm glad I stuck around to learn the truth. And I'm glad you finally trusted me enough to tell it." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "Thank you for giving me a chance to make it right." In that moment, I understood that ours was not a perfect story, nor a fairy tale. It was riddled with lies and missteps. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the imperfections made it more real, more worth fighting for. I reflected on how a little boy's innocent cry of "Daddy" had derailed one wedding day. But in the long run, it gave us the courage to build a stronger foundation. I realized I loved Noah, that I loved Jessica in a deeper way than before, because now we'd faced the worst parts of each other and found a way to come out stronger on the other side. I wish I could tie it all up with a neat bow and say the rest of our days were uncomplicated bliss, but that wouldn't be honest. Life kept moving. We had our share of arguments, moments when the memory of her deception resurfaced. Sometimes, I still wrestled with the hurt I felt when I realized how little she'd trusted me at first. Sometimes, she struggled with guilt and worried that I might wake up one day and decide I couldn't handle the responsibilities of a ready-made family. But we talked about these fears openly, and that made the difference. We promised no more secrets, no more silent assumptions. Months turned into years. I learned how to be the father Noah needed, step by step. The day he first introduced me to one of his friends as his dad, I felt a deep surge of pride and affection. Jessica just squeezed my hand, her eyes shining. By then, we'd accepted that love is never simple, and trust requires consistent care. But we were in it wholeheartedly, determined to show Noah that families can be built on second chances and honesty, even when the road starts out rocky. Looking back, I sometimes still cringe at the memory of that first wedding day. The hush, the stunned faces, the way everything fell apart in the space of a child's cry. Yet I also realize that if he hadn't run up calling me daddy, I might never have discovered the truth. Or maybe I would have found out years later in a more damaging way. There's a strange gratitude in knowing that moment of chaos forced us to confront reality, to make a choice about who we wanted to be. Today, when I see Jessica and Noah leaning over the kitchen table, finishing up some silly craft or talking about what color we should paint his room, I'm reminded that every bump in the road led us here. No story is flawless. Ours is messy, complicated, and deeply human. But it's also full of love, real love, the kind that acknowledges fear and doubt, but doesn't let them win. And I think that's the best ending I could have asked for.